My name is David Ciaravolo. I'm the Executive Officer of the Amateur Fishermen's Association of the Northern Territory, and I'm here representing them today. AFANT is, or AFANT as it's better known I should say, is how most people in the Northern Territory would know us. I'd like to thank Justice Pepper and the panel for the opportunity to speak here today. AFANT is the peak body for recreational fishing in the Northern Territory, and it's our role to represent the interests of all of the amateur fishers, including our some 4,000 members, as well as fishing clubs, associations and associated businesses. The most recent available estimates, though now dated, as we've talked about before, suggest over 1 in 5 residents in the Northern Territory participate in recreational fishing each year. As I've previously informed this inquiry, recreational fishing activity shares its social and economic benefits widely in the Northern Territory community. The benefits are not confined to the thousands of people who actually go fishing, but they are enjoyed by the towns, communities, businesses that the fishers visit for services and amenity. Further to this, no one needs spend too long in the Northern Territory to understand that fishing is an intrinsic part of the Territory way of life. The most recent value estimates for recreational fishing in the Northern Territory were produced in 2010 through the Recreational Fishing Survey, and the survey report estimated that expenditure of resident fishers was approximately $50 million in that year. Other studies suggest that interstate and international recreational fishing visitors contribute a similar amount to the Territory economy. Tourism NT estimated that $26 million of annual expenditure occurs in the guided tour fishing industry alone, and we know that lots of people visit to come fishing here on their own with their friends and without a guide. And in fact, Tourism NT also have established that people who come here and go fishing are primarily motivated to visit the Northern Territory for that particular purpose. So with world-class fishing experiences on offer, recreational fishing is a big tourism drawcard for the NT. Expenditure on fishing is spread through many businesses, business types, and most often locally owned, from tackle and boat outlets to hospitality and accommodation services. The NT government has stated that they believe recreational fishing to contribute over $100 million annually to the economy. New social and economic statistics for recreational fishing are due to be collected this year, so the timing is slightly unfortunate. Although vast distances, remote populations and high proportion of visiting fishers is unique to the Northern Territory, the difficulty of providing up-to-date figures for recreational fishing is common to all jurisdictions in Australia. The next survey alone is expected to cost $1.5 million. Now, I hope the take-home from all of this is that while we do acknowledge the figures available are in need of updating, the numbers are large and the benefits to the community are enduring. It's not in doubt that recreational fishing is an important activity and contributor to the Northern Territory. As a sector, as an industry, it is established, it is widespread, and it is sustainable. I'm here today on behalf of the Northern Territory recreational fishers to express our will that the many social, cultural, lifestyle, health and economic benefits attributed to recreational fishing are not put at risk by the development of a new industry. That every risk must be avoided or appropriately mitigated, and that all of the uncertainties filled with reliable information in advance of any approvals, and certainly in advance of any developments on the ground, should they occur at all. Generally, the feedback we've had from our constituents about their support or opposition to fracking, whether they believe the risks can be mitigated to satisfactory levels, has been mixed. However, I must be clear there's been absolute unity on the matter that recreational fishers do not want our fisheries, or the groundwater and ecosystems that support them, to be put at risk by the development of a new industry. While it may be possible to reduce the likelihood of certain risks, as we've seen with recent examples in the Northern Territory, in the case of aquifer scale or ecological scale contamination, there may be little we can do to mitigate consequences once the unlikely or even the unforeseen actually occurs. Thus, recreational fishers are highly adverse to chancing the future of our already well-established and valuable sector for the chance at developing another. AFANT takes this opportunity to thank the inquiry and commend the panel for their work to date, especially the production of the comprehensive draft final report and its 120 recommendations. We note that it's not been the task of this inquiry to decide whether the current moratorium be lifted or not, and that rather it's been your task to identify and assess, based upon the best available evidence, the environmental, social, cultural and economic risks associated with hydraulic fracturing, and where possible to make recommendations to mitigate those risks to acceptable levels. We also note that the inquiry has recommended that where gaps in evidence and understanding exists, the necessary additional information be obtained prior to the development of an onshore gas industry. Given the expert and evidence-based approach of this scientific inquiry, I don't see it as my role to necessarily question or endorse each of the 120 recommendations. However, I can convey that AFANT urges the panel to stand by its strong and clear recommendations so that they may appear in the final report that you present to the government in March. AFANT will also be encouraging the government not to pick and choose from these recommendations. AFANT recognises that the suite of recommendations in the draft final report are more detailed, prescriptive and comprehensive than the previous inquiries into fracking in the NT. To put it simply, we do not see this report as just more of the same. I do intend through the remainder of my submission to address some of the inquiry's recommendations that we deem to be, it's always good when the screen turns off, this is the advantage of paper, that we do intend to address some of the things that we think are especially important and relevant to the interests of our stakeholders. And we single these out to make it clear to the panel the strong community support for the recommendations. And I'll also seek to clarify the matter of whether exploration is included in our common understanding of the term development and why we think this needs to be the case. Finally, I'll conclude by providing a brief comment on our position of what constitutes acceptable risk to us and to the fisheries and ecosystems we so highly value. Like many in the broader Northern Territory community, the major concern of the recreational fishing sector is the possibility that water resources, particularly groundwater, could be contaminated by activities associated with the extraction of shale gas. Regulations must provide the community with confidence around the integrity of any potential wells should the moratorium be lifted in the future. The need to combine objective-based regulations with mandatory minimum requirements in critical areas of risk was a matter raised in our supplementary submission to the draft terms of reference in this inquiry last year. We are pleased then to see a version of this approach adopted within the recommendations of the draft final report. We therefore specifically acknowledge and welcome recommendation 5.3, which requires the government to develop and mandate enforceable codes of practice, setting out minimum standards in relation to well construction, testing and maintenance. And we also welcome recommendation 14.17, that the government develop and implement enforceable codes of practice with minimum standards and requirements to give clarity to the regulatory framework. We think those are good steps. Through our consultation with the fishing community and our regular engagement with many recreational fishers, it remains clear to us that many people are sceptical about whether effective regulation in this industry can ever really occur in the future. Whatever the regulations are put into place, it's clear that trust in regulators can only be built when the appropriate level of investment in monitoring, enforcement and effective, transparent communication also take place. It is essential that governance arrangements ensures that the regulators responsible for approvals and enforcement are independent of any role promoting resource opportunities. And with this in mind, we welcome recommendation 1431 that there must be a clear separation between the agencies responsible for regulation and for promotion of the industry. Further, we think that recommendation 1432, which relates to establishing a new regulatory agency, is essential. However, we reserve comment on whether option 1 or 2 is preferable. Suffice to say that either would be a significant step forward to better governance of this industry in the Northern Territory. And we think this is especially the case when taken in concert with the other recommendations, particularly 14.1, that the government design and implement a cost recovery system, 14.13, that the government impose a non-refundable levy for long-term management, monitoring and remediation of abandoned wells, and recommendation 1427 that the government enact a broader range of powers to sanction, something that was raised by a number of people way back in the draft terms of reference stage. Last year, AFANT told the panel that we support jobs and sustainable growth in the Northern Territory. However, whatever proposal, development should not come at the cost of or risk to our already well-established, vibrant, sustainable and broadly celebrated sector. We acknowledge, therefore, the significance of recommendation 14.4 that reserve blocks under Section 9 of the Petroleum Act with appropriate buffer zones must be declared for areas of high tourism value, cultural value, national parks, conservation reserves and areas of high ecological value. We see this as being consistent with our own desire to ensure important recreational fisheries and ecosystems that support them are protected from the potential risks of onshore gas developments. I guess I do have some questions about what that process would be and exactly when that would occur, but that's something that I think we'd be happy to engage with the government on should they go down the path of lifting the moratorium. At the same time, we also do want to note the somewhat subjective establishment of the voluntary buffer zone at Mataranka, and I know the panel has done the same. We contend that the best available evidence interpreted in a precautionary manner is the best way to determine the appropriate buffer zones. Should the moratorium be lifted, this should be the process for all prospective areas in our view, including the Beetaloo Basin where exploration licences have already been granted. We contend that exploration should not resume until the completion of the Strategic Regional Baseline Ecological Assessment, or SREBA, called for by this inquiry. And this brings us to the important topic of the Roper River, its relationship to the potential development of the Beetaloo Basin and the panel's recommendation for a SREBA in that area, as well as other areas considered for future development. We've provided evidence to the inquiry previously about the value of the Roper River to our community, its status as one of the NT's most important recreational fisheries. The Roper River is reliant upon groundwater flows, and these flows help to ensure connectivity of habitat and stock recruitment. We note that the panel has been provided with evidence that the bulk of the aquifer recharge that supplies the Roper River occurs within 50 kilometres of the river, and that in recognition of this, and the fact that there are currently petroleum exploration leases in that area, the panel has recommended in 7.18 that the Beetaloo Subbasin SREBA take into account all groundwater dependent ecosystems in the Roper River region. We think that's appropriate. In our supplementary submission to the draft terms of reference last year, AFAN encouraged the panel to make recommendations requiring baseline monitoring of ecosystem and aquifer conditions prior to individual developments being green-lighted. We noted that the need for improved baseline data had been previously acknowledged, including in the 2014 Hawke Report and in other jurisdictions as well. As such, we support recommendation 7.4 that the Strategic Regional Environmental Baseline Assessment, or SREBA as we are now learning to call it, including a regional groundwater model, be developed and undertaken for any prospective shale gas basin before any production licence are granted, commencing with the Beetaloo Subbasin. And recommendation 15.1 that SREBA be undertaken prior to the grant of any production licence for on-shale gas. We are concerned, however, that should the government decide to lift the moratorium, that the language and perhaps the intent of these recommendations does not necessarily preclude or comprehensively guide decision-making about further exploration processes, fracking or production testing in the Beetaloo Basin before the completion of the SREBA, including the proposed regional groundwater model, which we've thought is so important. It's our understanding that under the current process, a proponent must apply separately to undertake fracking and production testing at the exploration stage. The applications and required ministerial approvals are referred to as steps 8 and 9 of the standing directions known as the schedule. We note that the panel has recommended in 14.16 that the schedule be repealed and replaced with legislation prior to the grant of any production licence for the purpose of onshore shale gas development. It is not clear to us if or how the panel intend for exploration stage test fracking, stimulation or production testing of wells in the Beetaloo exploration leases to be considered by decision makers during the period before new legislation is enacted and before the SREBA in the Beetaloo is completed. We seek that the panel clarify this matter, and we acknowledge now that there are many details here to be across for us and for others. And it is possible that we've misinterpreted the intention with respect to this matter. However, the inquiry has drafted 120 clear and understandable recommendations. It has not shied away from calling for pause and further investigation when it has deemed more information is required. We are seeking that the recommendations relating to exploration process decision-making and actions in the Beetaloo Basin and other prospective areas be made equally clear and with the same level of precaution. We acknowledge that the risk from exploration fracking and test production may, due to scale, be not as great as at the production phase. However, it is our understanding that it is possible for aquifer contamination to occur during the exploration phase fracking, and that this may impact upon the environment and potentially the baseline data that is being collected. It is our view that given the already acknowledged gaps in understanding of the Beetaloo Basin aquifer systems and their acknowledged critical relationship to the Roper River ecosystem, that in the final report, this panel should ideally recommend that no exploration, test stimulation, fracking or well production testing be approved or take place prior to the completion of the Ciaravolo, including the regional groundwater model. In addition, no exploration process approval should take place until the implementation of Recommendation 14.16, the enactment of legislation to replace the schedule. And this brings me to the final comment about AFANT's position on acceptable risk to our valued fisheries and the waters and ecosystems that support them. We take this opportunity to reiterate to the panel and through this record to the government and the broader community that in our view, any risk of contaminating important lands and waters to the extent that it may threaten the many social, cultural, health and economic benefits of recreational fishing there is by definition to us unacceptable. We simply do not support hydraulic fracturing to occur in any areas where natural linkages and processes could facilitate these highly valued, community-owned natural assets and the people they support being compromised now or into the future, not for the onshore gas industry and not for any industry. We are now relying upon the experts, upon this panel, the evidence it has collected, the further studies it has called for, and its strong, clear advice to inform these parameters and to recommend the protection of what is so important to so many of us. And with that, I'd like to thank Justice Pepper and the panel for all the work you've done to date and again for this opportunity to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if I understand, again, just to summarise in a nutshell, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but effectively your submission is really many of the recommendations that we have made, which we've said, take for example the Ciaravolo that we've said should apply before production, you effectively say no, should apply before exploration.
What we're asking specifically, and I think I'd take this opportunity to point out that I have tried to confine, we've tried to confine our submission at AFANT to the activities and risks that we believe are most likely to impact our constituents directly.
Yes, no, that's a given.
And given that our concerns were around groundwater, yep, it was the exploration phase, fracking and test production was what we had yep, we had listed.
Okay, no, thank you, yes. Any question? Yes, Dr. Jones.
How about a hypothetical situation here, which is geographically based, for example? The Beetaloo is quite a large area north and south. The best of our knowledge so far, the Roper catchment extends about 50 to 100 kilometres south of there. How about a temporary exclusion zone in terms of any exploration activity in that area until more rigorous work has been done, which is necessary?
Well, I think a temporary exclusion zone would be preferable to not having a temporary exclusion zone, so that's an easy one.
Well, it could become a permanent one, of course, but...
It could become, correct. I guess all I would point to there is there had been reported in the draft final report that many people in the community and potentially people on the panel saw the exclusion zones as being somewhat arbitrary or subjective. And so I would like to understand what we would base that upon. I've seen the evidence presented that it's thought that the recharge occurs close to the Roper River, and I've read the comments that if it was 200 kilometres away, it could potentially take thousands of years, although I've also read that it's uncertain and that we'd need to do a regional groundwater study to understand that. What we're saying is we would like to see that study and understand that before we make that decision.
Understood. Any further questions? Again, thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you.
you.